Hello, everyone, and welcome to Movies You Should Have Watched. With me, as always, is my partner in cinema crime, Ranting Monkey.
Hello, how's it going, guys?
Hello, chat. Hope you all are doing well this weekend. I'll give a little couple shout outs here to Adrian and Q and Jean Pierre, Skeptalk, Puppy Hater, Teddy, Ree Terrapin, and Mashisu. Hello, everyone. So today, which hadn't exactly been planned for, but is a nice little coincidence. The day after the premiere of, or sorry, 2 days after the premiere of Avengers Infinity War, Monkey and I will be covering Darkman from 1990, a superhero movie after a fashion, but a original superhero movie.
Mm-hmm.
Directed by Sam Raimi of Army of Darkness and Evil Dead fame, but would later go on to direct quote-unquote real superhero movies with the Spider-Man films. The first set anyway with Tobey Maguire. Raimi had been wanting to get the rights to make a movie of either The Shadow, the old radio show hero of the 30s and 40s, or Batman, but he couldn't secure the rights to either, and Batman became a super-duper movie just a year before this one came out in '89. And so he decided to make up his own superhero in order to make a film rather than having to fight anybody else for the rights. And the results were, I think, a brilliant combination of elements and aesthetics from several different kinds of characters and things into what is probably one of my favorite movies out of the 1990s. Somewhere behind Hunt for Red October, of course, even though I think that was '89. But either way, I love this movie. I love the concept. I love the character. I love the backstory. I love the sort of world it establishes for our characters, and just the kind of the non-apologetic, outlandish comic bookedness of it all. I hate the sequels. Do not watch the direct-to-video sequels. Whatever you do, stay away, far, far away.
I haven't seen either of them. Yeah. Guys, I watched it partially last night and then finished up today, and it was my first viewing of it. I don't love the movie, but I do like it. I do like it.
Yeah. It took 5 years to make a sequel, and when they did, they obviously didn't bring back Liam Neeson to play the character. They brought in Arnold Vosloo, who would eventually be better known for playing Imhotep in The Mummy. But he made the character into something it shouldn't have been. But it's almost negligible. Don't pay attention to the sequels. Just pay attention to the first one. So what was your overall impression before we get into the details of it? Because this is the first time you'd ever seen it. I have a sentimental attachment to it. So what did you think in the overall?
It's okay. If you are watching this for the first time in 2018, you're immediately going to notice the graphics. There's no getting around it. That's the elephant in the room. You just have to forgive it. It's like watching the old Star Wars or Star Trek series. There's no getting around that aspect of it. Once you get past that, though, this is an excellent comic book movie. It's there's some of the stuff in it that was a little silly to me, but I think that plays to the comic book styling. One of the problems I do have with some of the AAA titles today, the Your Avengers and that kind of stuff, is that they try to make it look too real. They try to make it too real. And this was just, I can imagine this coming right off a comic book page, which I like. So yeah, I enjoyed the movie, and I really liked the end. I really did.
Okay.
Which we'll get there, guys.
Oh, yeah, we'll get there. So another thing to note before we begin is that anybody watching this in the era, like I did, would have immediately been drawn in by the music, which was done by Danny Elfman, who had just done all the music for the Batman movie a year prior. So there were a lot of similar notes, literal and figurative, in the music to this movie that sort of brought to mind the world of Batman at the time, which was Tim Burton's version of Batman was very dark and very gothic and had a very particular feel to it. And the music played into that quite a bit. So I remember when I saw this and the music came up, it was very appropriate to the character and to the tone of the film, but it was unavoidably relatable to the Batman superhero kind of feeling.
I get that. Yeah, I can see that.
So our movie begins with kind of a feint, because we don't get an introduction to the hero at all. We actually get an introduction to one of the primary villains, which is kind of a weird way to do it, but it is an interesting way to sort of set up the threat that is about to come. So we open up on the waterfront it's never really specified what town we're in. I think we're in Chicago, maybe, or something, but it's big city, whatever it is. It's big city. And on the waterfront, we meet a gangster in a big, long trench coat, and he's on a cell phone, which is attached to a box on the hood of his car, because this is 1989 or 1990, which was funny. And we find out in short order this is Eddie Black, and he just happens to be a black man, which isn't relevant, but it's kind of interesting. And he's talking very assertively to someone on the phone about some deals that are going on, and he's standing there in the dock in a warehouse with all these guys running around working on stuff. And we get the gist very quickly that he's some kind of gangster, because he's expecting a visit from someone named Robert Durant, who wants to tell him about how to run his territory or whatever.
And he ain't going to put up with that.
He's not going to put up with that. So then some cars pull up and some guys get out, and we see our cast of villainous characters. Now, each one of these guys has a name and a personality. I've seen this movie so many times that I know all their names and what makes them unique. And they're not like super villains in the sense they have capes and stuff, but they all have a gimmick, I suppose, or a little quirk about them that makes them distinct from one another. And our main villain is Robert G. Durant, played by Larry Drake. Now, when I saw this originally, it was such a 180 from what I knew of Larry Drake, because at that point in time, I only knew Larry Drake as Benny from Law and Order, who was a character who was retarded. But in this movie, he is an intimidating fucking gangster, which was such a turn for him. I loved it. I don't know about you.
I'm not as familiar with him. I can definitely see him playing somebody with Down syndrome, though.
Yeah, well, that's basically what the kind of character he played in L.A. Law, is that he was a mentally handicapped individual, and he was one of the best characters of that show, next to, say, Victor Cifuentes. But yeah, it was really odd seeing him in a role that was intimidating and had such like gravitas and everything. But anyways, you got Robert G. Durant, and you have his cast of characters, and they're all very distinct. You have the bald-headed with a little dagger tattoo on the side of his head, Paulie. You've got Guzman, who's like a ponytailed Latino guy or something. I can't quite tell. You got a long blonde-haired guy who's always smiling, and his name's Smiley, and he's very, very happy all the time to be doing what he's doing. You got a limping guy who we only know as Skip. And then you have kind of a nervous, spectacled guy named Rick, who is played actually by Sam Raimi's brother, Ted Raimi, who often makes cameos and plays roles in his brother's films. So they all get out, and they're all surrounded by like 100 guys, like 100 dock worker guys that just kind of show up, and they frisk them. And this is the first moment where you're watching something that's a bit cartoonish, because the weapons that drop on the ground as the camera dollies forward through this little aisle as they frisk them, is like nunchucks fall out, and knives and guns and all types of crazy shit.
I don't know why, but my favorite one was the brass knuckles.
Yeah, the brass knuckles falling down.
As I understand, you get rid of all weapons, but to me, because at this point we've seen like huge guns, and yeah, brass knuckles. I was like, oh my, yeah, you're right. This was the first part where it's like, okay, this is a comic book.
Yeah, which again, is a comic book.
That's not a bad thing.
No, and this really starts, it sets up that this is meant to be larger than life, over the top, a little bit of a comedic melodrama. And if you keep that in mind as you watch the film, you'll enjoy it a lot more than trying to imagine it as dark, gritty reality in a way. Because in a way, this movie is operatic, and I'll get more into that as we go. But anyway, so they frisk these guys, they dump a whole bunch of weapons down, and then Eddie Black comes forward and starts confronting them and starts telling them what's what. And you know, you can't muscle in on my territory, and I don't care what you say, blah blah blah. And he names off 3 points that he wants them to know. It's like, nobody fucks with Eddie Black, and this is my territory. And so he lists off with his 3 fingers what the deal is. And then Robert Durant, he takes out a cigar. This is very significant for the character. He takes out a cigar and a little cigar clipper, and he clips off his cigar and he says, you know, well, that's not what's going to happen. And so all of a sudden, with these guys that supposedly disarmed. Oh, sorry, there was a line where Eddie Black, he looks at Skip, the guy who's limping, and he says, "Bum leg," and Skip leans down and knocks on his leg with his fist. It says, "No leg." And Eddie Black says, I was engaged to a girl with a fake leg once," and Skip says, "Oh yeah, what happened?" "I had to break it off."
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, that's great. Anyway, so he gives him the points about how he's not going to be fucked with. And then Smiley ducks down, grabs Skip's leg, pulls it out, and it turns out that his leg is actually a hidden machine gun. And he starts mowing everybody down in comedic fashion.
With endless ammo. Mm-hmm. And this, to me, as silly as the scene with the disarmament was, this is the scene where you really know you're in for a treat. This whole scene, actually, and I mentioned this to Scribe last night. There's several parts of this movie that, rather reminding me of like a 90s movie, remind me of like an 80s TV show. Mm-hmm. And this is one of them. I could see this playing out in like the A-Team, especially with like the cars and stuff they had there. But yeah, he pulls out he takes out this dude's leg and mows down everybody. But then something else happens. Suddenly, all of them have guns again.
Yeah.
Without disarming anybody, they just all have guns again.
Without explaining how he got one. Like Robert Durant pulls out like this big like 44 Magnum thing out of somewhere, I guess, or is handed it by somebody, and he just starts like blowing things away. So the whole disarmament thing was kind of pointless, except to just sort of illustrate that we're in a comic book.
Sure.
And then as soon as Smiley starts shooting people, Eddie Black gives a signal, and then out of giant wooden crates, for no particular reason, guys in cars burst out of the crates.
Yeah. There's a driver and a shooter in each.
And they're already ready to go, driving out of these crates for some reason, as though they expected this to happen. But anyway, so a big shootout happens. Long story short, all of Eddie Black's guys die. I don't think any of Robert Durant's guys die. And Eddie Black is left alone, standing there untouched. And then Robert Durant walks up to him as his guys circle around and says, "Let's consider my points." And he grabs Eddie Black's hand and puts his cigar clipper around one of his fingers. And he starts listing off, I forget exactly what he says. I should have this memorized by now, but he starts listing off his little threats of like, because Eddie Black had 3 points. Robert Durant chops off 3 fingers. And then at the third finger, he says, "And my third point is, I have 7 other points." And he chops off the guy's finger, and then he screams. Then we cut to black, and we start with the opening credit sequence.
Yes.
Which in a way kind of gives you, there's this sort of like surreal montage of smoke and sort of distorted images of things that we're eventually going to see over the course of the movie as Danny Elfman's score rises up, which is great. Again, the music really sets the mode, but it's hard not to separate that sense of I don't know, musical ambiance from Batman. At least was for me back then. Still isn't, because I'm so used to that music.
Oh, they're very similar. They really are. But see, this is another reason or thing that me and Scribe see differently. Scribe paid attention to the music. I really don't. Mm-hmm. The only time I'll pay attention to music is if it really pulls me out, and this one didn't. So it went with the theme very well.
And after the credits, we come in on what is essentially an exposition scene. Mm-hmm. We center in on an eye looking down through a microscope at cells. Sorry, no, he's looking at taking a photograph. Sorry. And so in this scene, we essentially get an explanation for the audience as to the process of our main character and how he creates artificial skin. Now, when I first saw this movie, I didn't have any, because the ad campaign for this was just, who is DARKMAN? And it didn't really tell you anything about it. So as soon as this scene opened up, I had absolutely no idea what the hell was going on, because I was like, what are they doing? Mm-hmm. And that actually adds sort of to the mystery of the whole thing, as you discover that our main character, played by Liam Neeson, I think in the very first role I ever recognized him in, back then, plays Dr. Peyton Westlake, who is a scientist in this sort of loft lab apartment thing near the waterfront, by the way, which is important for later. And we see him taking pictures of his lab assistant's nose. He's zooming in on it. He's taking it from every angle. And then he takes these photos and he scans them into a machine. And this machine then essentially 3D prints a nose, or the skin of a nose.
Real quick, but before you get that, the way that they scan these images in for 3D printing is amazing. Mm-hmm. They basically stick a Polaroid into a printer, and it's awesome. I loved that aspect of this movie, is because it does remind me of the original Batman TV series. It's almost a page right out of there. That's how they would have solved that problem. Today, we know it would be much more complicated, and if they made this movie today, we'd have to sit through all of that shit. Where they just do it and it's done. It's like, thank you.
Yeah, it's show not tell. This is how it's done. They scan 3 photos. They extrapolate a 3D image out of this. They then put it through this machine that then prints out a nose.
Yes.
And so he takes this nose and he takes a little sample from it. He puts it under the microscope and he's watching it. And we learn very quickly that there's something wrong with the skin, is that it can make skin, but it doesn't have a very long lifespan. It only lasts for 99 minutes. For some reason, and it's apparently this test that we're seeing them do is, the latest of an endless series of tests to try to stabilize these skin cells. They don't know why. He's just very frustrated. It's like, why is it 99 minutes? Why is it 99 minutes? Can't figure it out. But yeah, so we get to see the whole, but it's not only do we get to find out what the skin is and what its limitations are, but seeing the actual steps he goes through to make a fake piece of skin is important, because it tells us what he has to do in the future that sets up a whole bunch of other activities that he goes through in the course of the story. Mm-hmm. So we get a lot of exposition that, to me, it didn't feel like I was being hammered over the head with it, because the two guys were sort of discussing the known problem and trying to go over the technical things. Like, did we check this? Did we check that? Why can't we get past 99 minutes? It felt more organic than just being sort of like slammed with it. I don't know if that's just me, though.
Again, this is another part where, for me, being a comic fan, because I don't mind exposition, and in mm-hmm. some movies that will throw you out of the narrative. But this kind of stuff happens in comic books because they have to do it. Yeah. You only have so much time to tell a story, so sometimes you have to do that. And you're right, they didn't weigh it down. He just, they ran through a quick couple of things, mentioned that they've done this many times, and it just gives you the sense that they've been trying this for a long time and they cannot figure this problem out. It wasn't heavy-handed at all, no.
And then we transition to meeting Peyton's girlfriend, who is played by Frances McDormand in one of her earlier roles before she became, Oscar winner and all that fun stuff. Mm-hmm. Frances McDormand is, if I remember correctly, married to one of the Coen brothers, and the Coen brothers and Sam Raimi are close friends. And so her being in his movie is kind of a family affair, I suppose, after a fashion. Although apparently there was some friction on the set between him and Frances McDormand as to how certain scenes should be played out and such, which seems kind of over the top given the movie and what Frances McDormand's career went on to be. But hey, whatever works, I suppose. So we get a little date night scene between Peyton and his girlfriend Julie Hastings. And they're looking at old film clips of like them in their youth, and they're kind of cuddling on the couch. And then they have a off-screen sex scene, which was tasteful for all things considered. Didn't dwell on the whole the sex scene so much. And then the next morning, she's on the phone talking to somebody about her job, and we learn that she is a lawyer. I think a real estate lawyer or something like that. And very significantly, Peyton comes along and puts a coffee cup down for her to have a cup of coffee, but he sets it down on a set of documents on the bed, and it leaves a big coffee stain ring on one of these pieces of paper. And she like, oh no, and she like puts the coffee cup up and like, oh no, and tries to wipe it off, but it's just kind of, it's there. And she says on the phone to whoever she's talking to that she was doing some research for this case. And in the course of doing this research, she came across a document she doesn't think she was supposed to see because it shows that there was some kind of payoffs going on. And she's going to have to go talk to the guy involved in this, someone named Strack.
Well, not only does she say she has to go talk to him, she says she's going to talk to him to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
Which actually is a wonder. This part was actually really, really smart. Does it jump? Is the very next scene where she's talking to him?
No, the very next scene is where Peyton proposes to her outside of the apartment as she's heading off to her meeting, or work or whatever. Peyton kind of, I mean, even though it's Liam Neeson and he's like this super tall, imposing guy, around her he kind of acts kind of nervous, kind of schoolboyish,
yes,
in a way. And so she's getting a taxi to go to work, and he says, "Hey, you know what? We should get married." And she's like, "Marriage?" She gets like really hesitant. Like he's like, "Yeah, you know, you're practically living with me already, and you know, and I love being with you and everything else." And she's like, "I'll have to think about it." She's very hesitant.
Well, there's also a great line that cannot go unmentioned here. He goes, "We're basically living together now. So the only difference will be when my grandma calls, you won't have to pretend she got the wrong number." So the poor lady's starting to think she has Alzheimer's.
Yeah, that's great. That was a great line.
That is an excellent line.
But she literally leaves him at the curb with a "I don't know, I'll think about it" kind of thing. So then the next scene is her talking to Strack, this big real estate construction development guy.
And this is what is so amazing about the setup for that scene right there. Because she says, you know, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. She goes and meets him, and she pretty much brings up the memo straight away. And instead of denying it, he admits it. He's like, you know, you weren't supposed to see that. But consider what I'm doing here. I'm trying to make a better city. He goes, but there are people out there who would use this information to hurt me. And who does he mention? Durant.
Robert Durant.
And it sets Strack up as at least genuine. I mean, he didn't lie to her.
Yeah.
And for me, this was an excellent part of the movie that didn't hit me until later. But I do want to point that out because it was such a good setup.
Yeah. So Strack suggests that the waterfront is a very valuable piece of property. He's trying to develop this city of the future, which kind of reminded me of like part of the subplot of RoboCop. You know, like OCP and all that fun stuff.
Actually, I don't remember where it happens in this movie, but I wrote this down because it pops up and it says Strack Industries, City of the Future.
Yeah. And
my mind immediately went to Stark Industries, City of the Future. The stuff from Iron Man 2.
Oh, yeah, with the expo.
Yeah. And what his dad was what Stark's dad was trying to do.
That's true. I didn't think of that. But yeah, so Strack tells Julie that, you know, the waterfront is a piece of property that several people are vying for, including himself. And he says, "Have you heard of Robert Durant?" And she says, drugs, extortion. Like he's a relatively well-known figure. But he says, yes, and also real estate. And he has a big interest in, the waterfront as much as I do. And so he says, now, if you were to just leave the memo here, walk out for a second, and if it went away, that'd be my responsibility and not yours. And she says, oh, well, I don't have the document here, which by her saying that actually sets up everything that happens next. So she confronts Strack about this, and then we cut back to Peyton and his lab assistant working again in the lab again on a new formulation to try to make the skin last past 99 minutes. And so he's sitting there, he's looking at it, the clock's ticking down to like 97, 98. And then all of a sudden a circuit breaker snaps and the lights in the lab go off. And so the lab assistant says, oh, must be the fuses again. I'll go check that. And he's going to check that. Westlake says, wait, what's the time? And the lab assistant says 99, 100 minutes. And Peyton Westlake's like, what? And he looks back at the microscope and the cells are still there and they're still working. And he's like, they're still good. And the lab assistant's like, what happened? What changed? And then he looks up and he says, the dark.
The dark.
And he gets this really dramatic line. I mean, it's so melodramatic. And again, it fits. And so it cuts to this angle where we're looking at him sideways, and the light, whatever light there is just on his eyes, like in the old 40s movies and things. And he says, what is it about the dark? What secret does it hold?
Yes.
It's so cheese, but I love it. I love it because it's so good.
Comic book. That would make an excellent comic book panel right there.
Yeah. And just as he has this realization that the cells are photosensitive, that the light is somehow degrading the cells quicker than they would be otherwise in the absence of a direct light, in this darkened lab, all of a sudden, the bad guys are there. All of a sudden. And we get these low-angled, like Batman villain sort of things from the 60s show, looking up at each of the characters.
But there's something that needs to be pointed out here, because when we see this shot of each of them, Smiley is holding the dude's leg. Yes, and the dude is there with hopping again.
Oh yeah, that's the other thing too. That there was an interesting bit in the opening scene where they're after the attack, after all the bad guys are dead and Eddie Black's the only one there. Skip, the guy with the false leg, is trying to keep his balance, jumping on one leg. Yeah. And then as Smiley is holding the fake gun on Eddie Black, or not the fake gun, but the prosthetic leg gun on him, he just holds out his arm straight so Skip can have something to hold on to.
Yes.
And I don't know what it is about that moment, but that really tells me these guys are a team. They've done this before, and this is part of their routine. Like each one of these guys is a minor supervillain in a way, because they each have a gimmick, they each have their own little quirk, and I mean their name basically tells you who they are. You've got Skip, you've got Smiley. I mean they're like Dick Tracy villains almost.
Well, that was another thing as I watched this. Dick Tracy came to mind because there's several parts of this, not necessarily story-wise, but aesthetically, where I thought of Dick Tracy.
Okay, and that's legit, because like I said, this entire movie, the character and the situation, is almost unashamedly sampling from a bunch of different genres and other established sort of characters and things. And we'll get into those as we go, because there's a whole bunch of them.
But it does need to be pointed out, there's no reason for him to be using the leg gun in this scene. No,
not really. I just
nobody should have disarmed him.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just a silly little thing. For some reason, he's still using the machine gun leg.
It's the gimmick. They like it. So then basically they start, they're looking for the memo. They're looking for the Belisarius memorandum, which, and Peyton has absolutely no idea what they're talking about, because he has no idea what they're talking about. So they grab the lab assistant and they put a bag over his head. and start suffocating him. It's like, tell us where it is, or we're gonna take out your lab assistant. And they start beating the shit out of Peyton. They start smashing his head through glass and punching him and kicking him and like pushing him onto this like boiling pot of chemicals or whatever. And he grabs the thing on the sides that are like electrified and his hands get fried.
Yeah.
There's torturing him, and it's almost like and again, it reminded me a little bit of like RoboCop, where like the hero is just absolutely like tortured and just mutilated ahead of everything. And he says, let him breathe. And Durant says, well, you heard him, Rick. Ventilate him. And Rick, the nervous Nelly of the bunch, has this little, I don't know, like golden or brass pistol. And he's also got a little like spider tattoo on his hand, which I always thought was interesting, but it doesn't have anything to do with the movie. It's just another little note. And he shoots the lab system and kills him right there. And so they start searching the lab and everything after dunking Peyton's face into like chemicals and shit.
Now here's something I think they could have done a little better, because from watching this, it becomes clear that this is not only the lab, it's also his apartment.
Yes, that's right. It was the lofted lab apartment.
But they don't make that clear until... Well, actually, they still never make it clear. You kind of have to put that together yourself.
Yeah, I mean, there is... when they're having their little date scene, where they're watching the stills and all that stuff, you can see the lab in the background, but yeah, it's not really made that clear that these two locations are the same, unless you're really paying attention to things. Now, the exterior shot of the lab when the movie opens is the same exterior we see when he's running out from her from the date to where she's going off in the cab. So, yeah.
Just for me, it was a little confusing because I'm like, why the fuck is that memo there? Shouldn't it be his house? And they're like, oh, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Yeah. And I remember when I first saw the movie that I was a little confused by that too. So I don't know why. Like looking back on it, like, well, yeah, they show that it's all taking place at the same location, but yeah. Anyway. So they find the memo and they leave Peyton basically to die while they set up, they open up some gas tanks, and then Durant puts down a lighter and then sets up this little toy water bird thing that goes back and forth and dips and that kind of thing, leaves it underneath it so that the nose will sooner or later hit the lighter and set off the gas.
Which, by the way, this is the most sensitive lighter I've ever seen in my life.
Oh yeah. That little nose is tits it and boom, but comic book. So they leave, and then Peyton is like disabled and crawling towards the lighter, trying to push it away before it blows up the lab. And just as he gets to it is when the little bird nose comes down, and there's this little slow motion shot and this creaking noise as it comes down and hits the lighter, and the lab blows up, and we see this late 80s, early 90s effect of Peyton's body being blown out of the explosion through the air and into the harbor.
Yes.
I didn't have... Now, that particular effect, yes, it's dated. I didn't have a problem with it in that particular sense. There are other effects over the course of the movie that are green screen that don't look that great. But other than that one didn't hurt me, didn't bother me too much.
That one, we also missed it right before the building blows up. His woman, I forgot her name.
Julie
is walking back up, and you almost see it. She's decided she's going to marry him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the building blows and his body goes flying out of the top.
Right. And so, yeah.
That scene, I want to talk about the special effects when we get a little later into it. I'm with you. I didn't have a huge problem with that, but it was definitely noticeable.
Sure. Now, the one that's more noticeable is the creative but not good looking in retrospect transition of seeing Julie standing outside in the dark of the exploding thing, and then all of a sudden she puts her hands down, and we transition with her still standing still from what she was wearing then to a mourner's outfit, and the background changes to a cemetery.
Yes.
So like in a comic book that would probably do something similar, where you have a panel showing her in shock at that thing, and then immediately cutting to her in the same position but somewhere else, showing a passage of time. It's green screen, and it looks really bad.
Yeah, and the weird part about that is he didn't have to do it that way because they go right from the green screen. They switch camera angles, and she's actually in a cemetery.
Yeah.
So all they would have had to do is have her in the same spot. And I've seen people do this in film before. You just measure her out and have her in the same damn spot. But they went green screen instead, and it looks funky. It really does.
It looks funky now. I remember back then it didn't look that bad because, you know, my tastes and my tolerances have changed over the last 30 years or whatever. But anyway, so she's at a funeral, and she's all by herself. There's nobody else there because apparently his grandmother, who doesn't have Alzheimer's, didn't show up or something. I don't know. But the guy driving the limo and the gravedigger having a conversation off to the side, and the limo guy says, "Didn't see you do much work out there." And the gravedigger says, "The guy blew up. They only found like part of an ear. I didn't have to bury much." So we know that they never found the body. But
he says this, and we see Julie at a full-size coffin.
Yes, it's true. There was a full-size coffin. For ceremonial purposes, I suppose.
You'd still have to dig the same damn hole.
Yeah, so it's like, but anyway, yeah. So
that just made me laugh. Sorry.
Yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense, but we get the idea that they never recovered his body.
Sure.
That was the message from that. And then we cut to a hospital. Now we assume that like at least several days, if not a week or something, has passed since the explosion. And in this hospital, we have a doctor walking around, and it sounds like a teaching hospital because she's talking to these, you know, medical students that are following her around about these different patients in this burn ward. And she starts talking about this John Doe that they pulled out of the river the previous week or whatever. And he has burns over 40% of his body. He's been in a coma the entire time. And they induced a coma, I think it was, because otherwise he would be screaming in pain for the rest of his life because of the severity of the burns on his body. So in order to, and she's explaining all this, and again, it's another one of those things where it's an organic exposition because you have a doctor telling students what they did and explaining the aftermath of it. So what they did was they severed certain nerve clusters in order to restrict his body from feeling pain, because otherwise he'd just be in excruciating pain the rest of his life. But the problem with this is, at least explained in the movie, is that in the absence of external stimulus from the world and from sensation and everything else, the brain draws more stimulus from the emotions, needing something to react to. And this can cause emotional, like basically manic depressive behavior because you're like real big highs, real big lows. There's no in between, fits of rage, that kind of stuff. In addition to all that, it also, because they snip these particular nerves, it allows adrenaline to run unchecked through the body, which in, stressful situations can lead to augmented strength because the body doesn't know that it shouldn't have that much adrenaline running through at any particular point.
He turns into the Hulk.
Well, yeah, so we get all this stuff about him real quick. And he's wrapped up like a mummy, and he's on this sort of turning wheel thing that I guess.
Why is he on a turning wheel?
Keep his circulation going or something. I don't know. Although I when I see it when he's like strapped up like that, I get different like images in my head of like, well, he's sort of like maybe a Christ-like figure, sort of. He wasn't in a crucifix position, but sort of. It's kind of a weird science thing, I guess. In a way, it's kind of like being on a board as Frankenstein, which is apropos given that it's a dark and stormy night out when this happens.
I just saw this, and it's another one of those comic book things that made me laugh. I'm like, there's no good reason to have him on a spinning cord.
Yeah, it's just for visual effect kind of thing. And of course, when it comes to a stop, is what jostles him awake. So it comes to a stop, jostles him awake, and he strains against his restraints, and we get this. This effect, like we're going into his mind and we see like the rage sort of like blowing up, and he sees images of all the violence that happened to him, and he sort of like loses control.
Oh yeah, Adebisi just right. The doctor, to prove that he can't feel pain, stabbed him.
Yeah, she poked him with it. She stuck a needle in him, and he didn't react. And she's kind of like laughing like this, and she says something to the effect, "I give him 5 on the buzzard scale or something." Yeah. Like he was just going to die anyway, and he's kind of laughing about it. And after they walk away, so we have this little animated sequence of like the neurons in his brain going off and all this stuff. And we see this a couple times in the movie to sort of represent his emotional explosion, or his explosion of strength or rage. Which, again, the effects are dated, but I kind of like that there's this little signal to the audience in a way that sort of emphasizes what's going on inside of him.
I wouldn't have minded it, except for like in that first one, especially there's a laughing face there for some reason that made no sense to me, and maybe it's one of the characters I didn't pay attention to. But they draw it out just a little too much for me.
Okay.
But it kind of reminded me of the Hulk TV show.
Yes.
Because we always saw his eyes turn green first. Yeah, just a little too drawn out for me. That's all.
We don't see him actually escape. We hear that people are like screaming, and there's an alarm going off, and the doctor. Ward. Yeah, into the bed ward, and then they run into the room, and then we see that all the straps on the thing have been just torn off, because of his superhuman strength. And she looks, and the windows open off into a dark, rainy, stormy night with lightning going off. And now, this is very Frankenstein.
I got to stop here, because this is the moment I decided I liked this movie.
Okay.
But before then, I was on the fence, and it was right there. I'm like, you know what? This is an old comic book movie, and like I said, as much as I loved Avengers, I kind of miss campy comic book movies. They don't have to be silly, because this one, it's not silly. I mean, there's silly parts to it, but it's just campy. It's like I said, it could have come right off a comic book page.
Yeah, it doesn't take itself too seriously. It doesn't try to be grounded entirely in reality. It's just grounded in its own reality, and it takes that seriously.
Yes,
that's all it needs to do. So we see him skulking around in alleys, and he finds this old, and he's like a mummy. I mean, there's so many things. You got lightning storms and laboratories, very Frankenstein. He's wrapped up just like a mummy in a lot of ways. He's in an alley, and he grabs like this trench coat out of a dumpster just to cover himself up, because I guess he's reflexively thinking he has to. He goes stumbling into the street, and of course, in comic book fashion, in very sort of operatic fashion, he just happens to see Julie across the street walking down with her umbrella out, and he goes stumbling towards her, like moaning and sort of like gasping at her, like, Julie! And of course, he's completely unrecognizable. She gets terrified and runs away, and he's, out of sorts because he's just woken up. He doesn't know what's happened to him. He falls asleep in an alley with water pouring down on him as he tries to sleep under a box. And whenever I see that scene, I always think to myself, he can't feel any of that, can he? He doesn't feel cold. He doesn't feel wet. He's just laying there. It's like he's doing all this stuff to like cover himself up and to keep himself away from the elements out of habit more than necessity for the sake of comfort. But then also stealing something a little bit from Psycho, he's laying in an alley next to like this drain where the water's pooling down in a little whirlpool, and he's staring at it, and then the camera closes in on his eye, and then it transitions into the whirlpool itself. We kind of go deeper into the whirlpool. I like that transition because, again, it's very comic book. We cut to him then going back to the remnants of his lab, which is just this burned out husk at this point. And he starts trying to grab his equipment and try to clean it up or something. But then he looks down at his bandaged hand, and apparently he has no idea what's happened to him to himself at this point. So he grabs a piece of glass and starts cutting away at the bandages around his face. And the camera moves away from being able to see what he's seeing, and he's looking in this mirror. So we, the audience, don't know exactly the extent of what's happened to his face yet. But he starts freaking out. And apparently Liam Neeson did a lot of research ahead of doing this role. He went to like burn wards and talked to like burn victims and stuff to sort of have an idea of the mentality of it, and also try to really, really emote the desperation and the despair of this character as he did it. And I think he did a pretty good job over the course of the movie.
The only there's one scene where he freaks out and he starts singing or something.
Oh, right. Yeah, we'll get to that. I'll talk about that because I both like and don't like that scene.
That's the only scene where I was like, what the fuck is he doing? Yeah, the rest of it, I had no problem with how he reacted.
So basically then what happens is, in sort of, narrative fashion, he decides that because of what's happened to his face and because of the reaction of what Julie had, he has to reset up his lab because now he needs the new skin in order to have a life again. So he collects all of his burned and half melted, busted up equipment, and he finds this old industrial abandoned warehouse. And we see him set up this, basically this superhero lab thing, which I thought was awesome.
Well, here's another part that made me laugh because they show his computer. He's obviously using the same computer from before because it's burned.
Yes.
This is a computer that's been through an explosion.
Yeah.
The screen still works, but there's some burn damage on the back of it.
Yeah, and the computer voice is kind of off kilter. It's like data integration, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Which is fine. Again, this is all of this is okay because the movie has already told us that we're watching a comic book. We're not watching "quote unquote" reality.
Yep.
But yeah, so we get a little bit of montage of him setting up his secret lair and his lab and everything. And but apparently, the only photo of himself that he has available to try to do a scan to recreate his own face is a photo of him and Julie, but part of the photo's been scorched by the explosion. It wasn't just completely, destroyed. It's still there. And as a consequence, the face is not a complete image. So it's damaged. So the computer cannot create a mask of this face with the information it has. But he figures out that he can extrapolate the missing parts of the face from the other side of the face that isn't screwed up and sort of create a replica that way. But the computer says that it's going to take like some 570 hours or something to create this rendering using the extrapolation that he's put in. Mm-hmm. So he says, okay, I have to perfect the skin. And so then we have this long montage of him going through sample after sample and this pile of like petri dishes that have all the failed samples and all these notebook pages and things of him like failed, won't last longer than 99 minutes no matter what he does. It won't last longer than 99 minutes in the light. Let's see. So let me get back to my notes here real quick. And then so we know that at least 500 hours, which is like what, 10 days or something.
Yeah, something like
that. So, a couple of weeks, a week at least of time is going to be spent. This is how well I am at math. Yeah. So anyway,
600 hours would be what, 10 days?
Yeah. So like
nine. No, I don't remember.
So, a week and a half. Whatever, week and a half, something like that.
You guys know what we mean.
Yeah. So he's working throughout all this thing, but we cut to Julie, who has gone to a ball put on by Strack. And we see that Strack has approached her, and he says, I'm sorry about what happened to your boyfriend. And she said, I want to talk about it. And then he kind of pulls her into a dance and tries to sort of like romance her in a way. And you got this romantic music playing. But then we zoom in at the back of the room through a grating, and there's Peyton in his bandages and everything, kind of spying on her. He's been sort of following her around, I guess, and stalking her and sort of keeping an eye on her. And he sees her dancing with this guy. And, you can see him start to growl and everything. And this is the first moment when I remember watching the movie that I thought, and this is before I knew anything about the history of what Sam Raimi meant to do with it. I immediately thought of Phantom of the Opera.
Yes, yeah.
Because I'd known the story of Phantom of the Opera before I even saw the musical, of course. And him spying on her from behind the screen and that kind of thing. I thought, ooh, this is Phantom of the Opera in a way, because he's scarred and he's hiding from people and he's running around. But he also sees at the party So amazingly enough, because why would they be there? It didn't make a lot of sense to me as to why they would be out in public like that. So, but anyway, Robert Durant and Rick, the nerdy, sort of nervous Nelly of the gangster bunch.
Yes, the one who shot his assistant.
Right, the one who shot. And as soon as he sees them, he gets visions of and memories of his attack in his brain. He gets all mad, and it's kind of implied. I don't know if this was intentional or not. I assume it probably was. It's kind of implied that Robert Durant and Rick have like a homosexual relationship or something. Because like Rick is like, "Would you like another drink?" And he's like, "Yes, that would be lovely," or something like that. And I was like, I always thought like, is that supposed to be like they're like in a relationship kind of? I don't know.
There's another scene. I think it's when, well, we'll get there in a second, but Rick goes missing.
Yes.
And the other bad guys, when they're looking for him, I think this is the scene where they say, someone goes, "I don't know what he sees in him." And again, yeah, you get that implication that, yeah, they're gay together.
I think Skip said something like, "I mean, I know he likes little Ricky," or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah. And so they never overtly come out and say it, but there's some notion that, that they have something going on the side. But anyway, so next we see Rick walking away from the party down an alley all by himself because, as you do.
Hey, I need to step away real quick. I'll be right back.
Okay, I'll talk to the chat real quick. Let's see. So what do we got here? Jean-Pierre says, so Darkman is similar to Phantom of the Opera. It's similar to a whole raft of different things. Phantom of the Opera, Frankenstein. It's got aspects of like Mission Impossible that we'll get there soon. The Shadow, all types of like, superheroes and anti-heroes and things like that. Kelvin says 23 days, 7 hours, 57 minutes. Oh, okay. 23 a month. Wow. Okay. That's a lot of time. If there was a Darkman reboot, I will not see it. I don't think you can reboot this. I'd rather they didn't. The true sequels to the movie, I think, are the novel series. There was like 4 or 5 books they put out, sort of continuing the adventures of Darkman. And they are, accordingly cheesy, but well-written and violent and gritty. In the tone of the first movie. I own all those books, surprisingly enough. I don't think they're easy to find these days. And Marvel did get the rights to make a limited comic book series based on Darkman that also continued the story. I have like the first and second issues, I think, at least the first one somewhere. I wish I had them all. I don't, because it too was very heavy stuff. There was like torture going on and all kinds of crazy things. But it wasn't a Marvel property to begin with. Marvel got the rights to make a comic book based off of it. So it started out as a completely independent thing. Marvel got the rights to make comic books based on it. So technically, Darkman is now a Marvel character. I don't know if they still have the license to it. I don't know how that works. But as far as actual comic books are concerned, Darkman is part of the Marvel universe, but probably not part of the main Marvel universe.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Let's see. Question.
Ricky was walking down the alley.
Yeah, Ricky was walking down the alley. Mash used to ask question, if it were made today, would he be called Darkman or Dankman? Oh, Dankman? That'd be a completely different movie. That'd be like Pot Smoker Superhero or something. So Rick's walking down an alley by himself, and we see a dark shape drop down in the alley behind him. And he gets kind of nervous. And he's like searching around. All of a sudden he turns around and this tattered hand grabs his face and he starts screaming. And then all of a sudden we're down in the sewers underneath a manhole in the middle of the street. And Darkman is holding Rick by like his throat over the pit that is the sewage pipe. And selling him, tell me what I want to know. And he's like, and so he starts bellowing out about there's going to be a pickup of some money, and it's going to happen at this place, and that's all he knows. And he says, I've told you everything. And there's this close up of Darkman's face, and you just see like these lipless teeth behind the gauze, and these crazy eyes of Liam Neeson or Peyton Westlake or whatever. He says, I know, Rick. I know you did. but let's pretend you didn't. And then he busts him up. He pushes him through the manhole cover like head first, which would probably break his neck. But anyway, he knocks him out of the head first through the manhole cover. So he's halfway up in the middle of the street. And he holds him there as a truck runs him over.
Yes.
I loved that. I love that whole thing.
But not before. I mean, this is one of the scenes that went on too long because there's like a full minute of him dodging cars before he finally gets run over.
Yeah, there's a little bit too much. Yeah, it could have been cut by about 15 seconds or so, been fine. So then after hearing this information from Rick, we cut to DARKMAN in his official sort of like costume now with his hat and his gauzed up face and everything and his cloak. And he's hiding in an alley with a camera. And he's taking pictures across the street of this deli where Paulie, the bald gangster, is being met by Guzman. And Skip, I think, was also there. And they hand him a briefcase. And like, here's the money. And so we see DARKMAN taking a whole bunch of pictures of Paulie's face and the faces of the other guys and Paulie's hand. And then we cut from a photograph of Paulie's hand. We transition immediately back to his lab, which I thought was a great cut. A really great little transition. And the camera pans back that it's one photo clipped up on a line of photos of not only Paulie, but of Durant, Guzman, and everybody in the gang, and probably some other people in the background that you can't really see. And he's there, and DARKMAN is starting to scan these photos. He scans the photos of Paulie's hand, and he makes a copy of Paulie's hand, and it comes out of the machine, and he puts it on his own hand. And there's this moment where it's like, you know that the actor playing Paulie is like sort of underneath the camera and behind him using his own hand in front of him. But it works for what it is. And then there's this really cool little scene where he's typing at the computer with his fake hand on, but his unwrapped hand as well. And you see this ghoulish sort of burned up hand typing at the computer next to a natural hand where you can kind of see where the seam is and his nasty wrist starts. I always thought that was really cool looking. But he makes a mask of Paulie, or he starts telling the computer to make a mask of Paulie. And it makes this little wireframe of the guy's face that transitions over into an overlay of the actual guy's face who is sleeping in his bed. And DARKMAN he has snuck in the apartment. He puts a rag over the guy's face and knocks him out. And then we see him put on the mask, put on the guy's clothes, put on the guy's aftershave to make himself look and appear like him.
We don't actually see him. This is I wrote this one down because this is this I did not like. We don't see him put on the mask. What we see is him take off the gauze, and he's already wearing the mask.
Yes.
I'm like, why in the fuck does he have gauze on over the mask?
Well, to keep it in the dark.
But he didn't have the whole thing. I mean, the eye area was still.
Well, comic book. What can I tell you? It makes for a more interesting sort of thing to show the guy already like standing there as a different character, I guess. I don't know. I kind of liked it. I kind of liked that he was already dressed up as the guy before he showed up.
And this is also the only time we see clean gauze on him.
Yes, except for in the hospital. Yeah, this is the first time. Yeah, all the other times the gauze is kind of raggedy and old and dirty.
Dirty as shit. He even wears that gauze under the masks.
It's true in some cases, yeah. So he makes himself look like Paulie, and he's got his little timer. He's only got 99 minutes. So he gets from Paulie's apartment to the deli, presumably a couple of days later, like he knows the guy's schedule by now, he's been stalking him. Oh, and somebody in the chat said that 500 some odd hours would be like 23 days.
Yeah.
So it's like almost a month that he was working before this. So a lot of time has passed. Anyway, or it's still passing, I guess, because it still hasn't been completed yet. We're still in the process of that.
Yeah, that's one of my other complaints with this movie is they don't do a good job explaining how much time has passed.
Yeah.
And we really get that with this Paulie scene coming up.
So he goes to the deli, posing as Paulie, and he's sitting there like completely stone-faced because he doesn't know how to act, and he's just got like a fake face on. And Skip and Guzman come up with the suitcase of the payoff for the day or whatever, and they start talking to him, and he doesn't know what to say because he doesn't know how to sound like Paulie. So he just kind of like mumbles at him, is like, yeah, whatever. And he grabs the money and just kind of leaves. And then immediately we cut to Polly's apartment again as Durant and the gang are busting in. And some short amount of time has passed, very short, which is too short to make this make sense. Because Durant and them are angry that Polly apparently didn't drop off the money. Or like he was supposed to take the money and give it to somebody else, but he didn't give it to Durant or something.
He just asked, where's the money? Where's the money?
Where's the money? So the time between him revealing his mask and starting his timer at 99 minutes, going to the deli, picking up the money, and then disappearing, and then Durant showing up, all has to happen inside the span of less than an hour and a half, or thereabouts, which seems awfully short. But then I don't know how soon he was supposed to drop off the money or who he's supposed to give it to, so who knows. Anyway, so Polly's woken up. He's already in a suit and dressed. There's a suitcase open with 2 airline tickets there. Now, how Darkman got 2 airline tickets being without the internet and everything else in the span of time, I suppose he put on a fake face and went and bought them somewhere. I don't know. There's 2 airline tickets, one for Polly and one for Rick. Polly has absolutely no idea what the fuck's going on. He's been unconscious this whole time. And Durant surmises that Polly and Rick, who's also missing, Rick's been missing, are about to make an escape with the money off to
Rio.
Tahiti, Rio first class. And so Polly, not being able to convince them that he wasn't the one that took the money, because it was Polly as far as they know, they throw him out a window. And he hits the car at the bottom of on the street. And a lady's on the sidewalk screaming because she just saw a guy jump out of the window and die. But then out of the corner of her eye, she sees the exact same person sitting on a bus bench right there, because Darkman apparently decided to hang out and wait and see what happens outside of Polly's apartment. Again, doesn't make sense, except it's a comic book.
And see, this is the time thing for me, because either this happened over a week or over a day or two, or like you said, it all happened within 99 minutes.
Well, the him taking the photos of Polly and making the mask and everything obviously took longer than it took a day or something.
Sure, but
this day, the time between knocking Polly out, getting the money, and then sitting on the bench all happened. And Durant, finding out the money wasn't there or something, and then coming to the apartment, all this happened within 99 minutes. Because the mask starts melting.
Yeah, so we know that it's right at the end of its run. So
yeah, so all this happened in a very short amount of time. Again, if you don't think about it too hard, but it was a weak spot in the narrative. It would have been better if they just hadn't done that. Just let him die, and then why? But I guess they had to add and show that the mask was melting. And I think this is the first time we've seen a full mask melt at this stage of the game. So it kind of set up the stakes of how tenuous his impersonations are for the rest of the movie. So they throw Polly out of the window. He goes back to his lab after escaping from being discovered, and he starts freaking out about what did he do, because he just caused a guy to die, and he has this sort of emotional breakdowns like, what am I becoming? That I did all this. Go ahead.
I think it's weird that he has this breakdown after causing a man to die, but not after killing a man.
Well, yeah, it is. It might just be crashing down on him or something. I don't know. But they talked about, they mentioned before that his emotions will always be heightened in either way that it goes, whether he'll have a super duper high, a super duper low, be really happy, really angry, really sad. So this might have just been like manic depressive time. I don't know. But in the midst of this breakdown, the computer says the reconstruction is complete. And you see a little holographic face, full face of Liam Neeson floating there in the machine. Let's see. Let me so then we cut to Julie at the cemetery, just for, because she's there visiting the grave, I suppose. And then all of a sudden, out in the distance, there's Peyton standing there, all fully formed and in perfect health and everything else. And she's, freaking out, and he's trying to explain to her, like, no, I was in a coma, and I was dead to the world. I was in a hospital. I'm still alive. It's okay. We can be together again. And they sort of have a, I don't know. You see his clothes change, so at least 2 days are going by at this rate or something. They go and sit down at a cafe and start talking to each other about what happened, and I really find it interesting that, you know, the way that he uses his voice after the explosion, prior to how he spoke before the explosion, he does change it. He makes it rougher, more dry, sort of crackly in a way, to show that, you know, even though he's got his face on and everything, he hasn't like perfected his own voice again. So they kind of kibitz it a little bit, and he tries to convince her that, you know, they can be together. He just needs more time. He needs to go to therapy. He can't stay long, that kind of thing. So he's always coming and going because he's only got an hour and a half to hang out with her before he's got to split again, before his face melts off. So while this is happening, he's still on his quest for vengeance. You know, even though he's trying to, he's got his face back, and he's already got he's got a bunch of free money he took from the gangsters. That he can sort of fund his, and that's what I always assume, that's how he's funding his projects after that point, is he's got a bunch of money he stole. But he's still on his quest for vengeance. And so we cut to Durant and his finger collection. And he's like polishing them up in his little like study or whatever in his mansion.
That was so creepy.
Yes, it's really creepy. And the Wikipedia entry mentions that was put in there to suggest, without overstating it, that he has some kind of military background from like Vietnam or something, and was keeping trophies from his conquests, kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
It's never said that, obviously, but that's apparently where the inspiration came from, something like that. So he's tending to his like rotting finger collection. And he's talking to his other gangster friends. I think he's talking to Guzman or whatever. And he says, you know, the money we lost from Polly has really put a dent in our financial situation. We need to shake. Sorry?
I have a visitor.
Oh, who's the visitor?
Come here, you. Come here. What you got? Why do you have your vitamins? Does Grandma know? What?
Holding a little tiny baby. Her name is Edward.
Who was holding a little tiny baby?
That little lady. Her name is Edward.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, love you.
I want that baby.
Go find that baby. Sorry about that.
So Durant is talking on the phone, saying that they're going to have to, in order to make up for this this loss of money, they're going to have to go shake down somebody who owes them money, a guy named Hung Fat in Chinatown. I love that name. And while he's on the phone, we cut to the outside of the mansion, where DARKMAN has tapped the phone, because I guess that's what, you know, skin scientists know how to do, and is recording this phone call with Durant speaking. And we move back to his lab, where he's listening to this part of the tape over and over again of Durant speaking, saying, that would be just fine. And then it rewinds and says, that would be just fine. And it does this 4 or 5 times, and finally he stops it. And then you hear Durant's voice come out of DARKMAN's mouth, and he says, that would be just fine.
That would be just fine.
Because he's learning how to imitate the guy's voice, so he doesn't have the same Polly situation again. And then comes one of the funniest scenes. It just cuts to this black and white security camera footage at a convenience store, as you see Robert Durant, big time gangster, holding up a convenience store, and
not just mentioning exactly who his name is.
Well, he looks right at the camera and says, he's like, I'm Robert Durant, Robert G. Durant. It's just like, it's so fucking hilarious. And so he frames Durant for robbing a convenience store, and then they cut to the cops coming to Durant's door and going like, are you Robert Durant? And he says, yes, I'm Robert G. Durant. And then he's suddenly in cuffs, being taken away. And then we see who is obviously DARKMAN in the back of the car with the rest of the gangsters, heading to this meeting with the Chinatown crime boss. Mm-hmm. And he's adjusting his skin and sort of like getting himself ready. And they go up to the crime boss, and he starts giving him this little speech about how, like, oh, Robert, or Wobbert, as he says, Wobbert. Wobbert. I would love to pay you your money, but things aren't good right now and everything else. And so, when the time comes that I can, certainly I will pay the little people like you back, and blah. He's sort of lording it over him a little bit. There's this moment where he, Durant or Darkman sort of like stops and says, you will give us the money you owe us by the time I finish this cigar. And he takes a cigar out and clips it all the way down to just the nub. And he starts smoking it. And then he holds the match underneath his hand, which of course is his fake skin hand, but nobody else knows that. And he just holds the match there, waving it back and forth as they hear the skin start to crackle a little bit with the heat under there. And this whole scene apparently intimidates the guy enough that he goes, okay, Bob, you got me, or whatever. He's like, you win. And so Durant is getting out of jail at that point. His lawyer's gotten him out of jail on bail or whatever. And the lawyer's saying, you're lucky I was able to get you out on bond or whatever, because they got footage of you robbing the place. I mean, It was you. And he's like, I would never rob a convenience store. What the hell? And so he gets in a cab to drive off to this meeting he's supposed to have with the crime boss down in Chinatown. Well, he gets there just as they're exiting. And there's this great little scene where in this revolving door on either side of it are two Durants.
It really came off like an old Scooby-Doo episode.
Yeah, just a little bit, because they start spinning around in the revolving door over and over again, and like the other gangsters are outside and they can't tell which one's the real Durant.
No,
it's like,
shoot him.
Shoot him. It's like, shoot him. No, shoot him. And then they both get outside and they start fighting each other, and they're spinning around, and every time they look at them, it says, don't just stand there, do something. And then and finally one of them knocks the other one down, and he starts scolding the gangster, and he picks up the suitcase full of money that they just got. He starts scolding the other gangster. I think it was Guzman. It's like, what the hell are you doing? It's like, shoot the guy. Can't you tell it's me? And then just then the guy who grabbed the suitcase, his skin starts bubbling.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh shit. And so he starts running away. And so they start shooting after him with like desert eagles and shit in the middle of a Chinatown market. And I think they hit a couple of innocent people along the way.
Well, it's amazing how bad their aim got from that opening scene.
Yeah, exactly. And so Darkman gets away as the fake face is melting on the ground. And there's this moment where like the three gangsters are standing there kind of looking around. They're kind of casually hiding their guns back in their chests. And I'm like, you just blew people away in the middle of a market, and you're trying to be inconspicuous now? Like, what the fuck are you doing? So Darkman gets away with another suitcase full of money. So he's got two big suitcases full of money now. But then we cut to him and Julie at the fair. Now, I forget. I skipped something.
What'd you skip?
So the part where the thing that you didn't like, the thing where he's dancing around.
Oh, yes.
So this was back before the facial reconstruction had completed. Okay. He was kind of freaking out, and there was this cat that was in his little lair, this alley cat that he'd sort of taken in as a friend. I assume this cat is now Barbecue, given the events of the movie later. But anyway, so this cat was sort of his audience, and he's like, oh, you like looking at a freak? And he starts dancing around like, see the dancing freak, pay $5, see the dancing freak. It's very Sam Raimi. If you've watched like Army of Darkness and other things, it's this very sort of like ludicrous scene of him sort of having a breakdown about his situation where he's like, now he's a freak, and he's sort of like expressing that in this very comic, cartoonish way. But then that almost immediately jumps to him being in absolute despair over what's happening to him because he's losing control. He's trying to get himself back to, some measure of sanity because he's losing it. So I think it was meant to sort of illustrate how tenuous his grip on stability is mentally. It's very cartoonish, very weird. But
he also you forgot where he put a what's it called? What's the name? And you used to pour stuff
a funnel.
funnel on his head, so
Yeah.
he kind of looks like the Tin Man from
Yeah,
Wizard
or
of Oz.
a clown or something. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it was just I understand that he was having a breakdown, but it was a weird breakdown. I understand because he throws stuff around and everything, and I get that part of it, the anger, the rage, the I'm silly, let me sing you a song part. Okay.
Yeah, like I say, I buy it. I buy it, and knowing Sam Raimi, it's fit his style. But anyway, so yeah, I skipped over that part. I apologize. So anyway, but sort of attached to that, now they're at the fair. Him and Julie are at the fair, and they're going around. I guess they got off a ride, and he says he has to go soon because he has to go back to therapy and everything else. And she's like, "Why do you always have to go? Why can't you just stay? Why can't we be together?" And he's like, "I got to get better first. I got to get better. I'm not all well yet." And so he says, "Hey, before I go, I'm gonna win you an elephant. I'm gonna win my girl an elephant." So he goes up to this milk bottle thing at the fair where you throw a ball and try to knock 3 milk bottles off. And almost always they're magnetized and you can't actually knock them off or whatever. At least that's the old Carney supposedly trick and everything. So he starts. He's got his three tries at the apple, so to speak. And so he throws one, throws the second one, he misses both times, or the second one bounces off or whatever. And behind him is another show going on where it's like, see the what is it, like a misfit of science, a freak, and it shows this sort of like lizard boy. And interesting little trivia: the lizard boy that you see in the movie is actually the makeup effects artist for the movie, dressed up as a lizard boy. So this sort of like sets his nerves on edge a little bit because of that little dance he did earlier where he's like thinking of himself as a freak. So his anger's building as he's trying to, knock these bottles down. And with his third shot, he gets this little burst of like, rage, adrenaline power, and he throws it. And there's this great little Sam Raimi shot of like following the baseball through the speed of it. He does this kind of stuff in like Army of Darkness and other things. And it blows the bottles away. Which were probably magnetized and probably couldn't be knocked over by any normal throw. And so he's like, okay, the pink elephant, please. And the guy running the stand is like, "Sorry, buddy, you have to stay behind the line." And he's like, "Well, I was behind the line. I'll take the pink elephant." And it's like, "No." And he starts like really getting on his nerves, and you can see him like losing control a little bit. And the guy says, I think he says something like, "What are you, some kind of freak or something?" It's like, "I said no," and he pokes his fingers into his chest. And then you get this, again, dated special effects, green screen animation thing of like just his world coming apart. Like the seams of reality are cracking around him with like hellish light and everything. He's having sort of this hallucination kind of deal of how angry he is. Again, in context with the era of the movie, I think it's fine. It does look bad now. I can't avoid it.
Yeah, again, if you're going to watch this movie, you have to be able to put that part out of your mind.
Yeah.
To me, I think those things that when they show that, it goes on a little too long. But otherwise, I have no problem with when they do that.
So then everything comes back together, and then he just grabs the guy's fingers and bends them back like they're rubber.
Which was actually a great effect.
Yeah, it looked really good. It's so. I mean, there's no blood, but it's just so violent and just so immediately like, oh shit. and they're all screaming, like he's screaming and she's screaming like, ah, and then he picks him up and throws him through the back of the wall of the amusement park thing. And it's just so sudden and just so out there. I love it.
Yeah, that was this is where the movie actually starts to change for me a little bit.
Okay.
Because that is the first special effect that they did that really worked for me. Mm-hmm. And yeah, you can still tell, obviously he didn't just break this guy's fingers. But they did such a seamless transition with it. Mm-hmm. And they obviously used a practical effect.
Yes.
That it really worked. And we'll get more into that in just a few minutes, actually.
Yeah. And then one of my favorite lines of the movie is he grabs the elephant and he pushes at her. And he tries to give it to Julie, and she says, "I don't want it." And he says, "Take the fucking elephant." Yeah. And in his Darkman voice, like, "Take the fucking elephant." And I love it. It's just so
brutal. And then in that moment, of course, he realizes just what he's done. He starts having another breakdown. He starts sobbing and running away. And she follows him.
Well, his face is also melting at this point too.
Oh yes, his face starts melting as soon as that happens. So he covers it up with the elephant and runs away. And there's smoke coming out and all that fun stuff. And apparently she follows him all the way from the fair to wherever the industrial part of town is. Because on foot, he goes from there, and she follows him back to his secret lair, basically. And so she sees him run into the lair, and she goes chasing after him. And she gets to the entrance of the warehouse, and she starts yelling at him like, Peyton, why won't you let me see you? I want to help you, And he's hiding in the dark, now fully without the mask on and no bandages. And I think this is the first time we see him completely uncovered. Yeah. And it is horrifying. It is grotesque and horrifying. I love it. It's so like only like the one quadrant of his upper face is actually somewhat intact, but it's pale as hell. The rest of him is just this scarred and charred like massacre of flesh. And I think it looks great. I don't know about you.
The only part of it I didn't like, otherwise they did a pretty good job. The teeth on his mask,
yes, keep
moving.
Yes.
And so that kind of ruined it for me. But otherwise, yeah, the makeup job was excellent.
So then Julie goes to see Strack again because now that she's with Peyton, because at one point during one of their dates, he asked her, was there anybody else while I was gone, while I was in a coma? And she says, well, yes, but, he was just kind to me and he was, a nice man and everything. But he doesn't mean anything to me. So
that was at the fair, yeah.
That was at the fair, yeah. That was at the fair because he was going to tell her what happened to him, but he stopped himself and instead just sort of after seeing the freak thing,
stopped him.
Yeah. The freak thing stopped him from revealing what happened to him because he doesn't want her to be scared of him. So he instead changed gears to, did you see anyone else while I was gone? Well, after this little experience of her at the park and everything, and that she really does still feel strongly for him, but she doesn't know what's going on, but she knows she can't split her attention anymore, Julie goes to see Strack to basically break up.
Mm-hmm.
But while she's at his office, for no particular reason that makes any sense, the coffee stain memo is on his desk and she sees it. And she knows that thing should have been burned up in the explosion. But since it wasn't, and he has it, something's not right. And he sees that she sees the memo, and he understands immediately what conclusion she has to come to, and so he just fesses up. He again, like he's completely honest, sort of, telling her
he's an honest criminal.
He's an honest bad guy. So he explains to her that I got that, and it's a really tragedy what happened to it. But Robert is sometimes overzealous in his efforts on my behalf. She says a great line as he's sort of wrapping up his confession to her. She says, "If you're not going to kill me, I have things to do."
Yeah.
Which I love. I just like, and so she walks out of the office, and then immediately thereafter he calls Robert in, and he says, "Well, Robert, I got some good news and I got some bad news." And Durant says, "Tradition dictates you tell me the bad news first. All right, your wife's dead." And he's like, "Huh?" And this is the first time we ever have a notion that he's married to somebody. So if he was with Rick, it was obviously an affair of some kind. And he says, "Well, I'm joking, of course." He's like, "No, that guy that you were supposed to kill, you didn't kill." And he's like, "What? He's toast. I blew him up." He's like, "Nope, he's alive." Because Julie had told Strack that Peyton was back.
Peyton was back. Yep.
Yeah, Peyton was back, and she didn't know anything about him. She had mentioned this before she realized that he was the one that blew up the warehouse. So Durant promises that he'll take care of it. And he says, "Well, where do I find him?" And he says, "I think we have a guide." And we immediately cut to Julie going back to the warehouse, trying to find Peyton and trying to find out what happened to him and try to help him and all this other stuff. And right in front of him, as he sort of almost is about to come down and see her, cars surround her and she's kidnapped.
Yes.
By Durant. And so now we have our damsel in distress. And
they start shooting at him too. And again, thankfully, they've really gotten bad at shooting.
Really bad aim. And so he runs into the warehouse. And then we also see that the helicopters appeared.
Yes.
And helicopter with Durant on it with a super gun. And so there's this rooftop chase. So the chase goes from on the rooftops back into the warehouse and then back outside again, if I remember correctly. So he sees the helicopter and Darkman says, "Oh, you got to be shitting me." I just love that. It's just so, I love that. So Durant's got like this like grenade launcher basically that he's shooting these big explosive rounds at Darkman as he's running around the rooftops. And he's back in the warehouse. I forget exactly the chain of events. I know that at least in the warehouse, they're chasing him around for a second. That Guzman and Smiley are chasing him around the warehouse with guns and trying to shoot him. Guzman finds Darkman's like collection of masks and gloves and everything that he's made in preparation for stuff behind like a tarp. And then suddenly Darkman falls on him from the ceiling in this really bad CGI effect of him coming down at him straight to the camera.
Yeah, they do that effect a couple of times in this movie, and they all suck.
Yeah, they all look bad now. I forgive it because of the era, whatever.
Well, see, now we're about to get to where I say why I don't forgive it as much as I normally would.
Okay. So, sorry.
He kills Guzman.
Yes.
And then we switch to Smiley.
Well, no, he doesn't kill Guzman.
True. He just tackled him.
He tackled Guzman, and then Smiley's looking around. All of a sudden, this guy's running at him, and he's like out of the blue. So he just shoots him, and the guy falls on the ground. And you can see that the face is a little loose. So he uses his gun barrel and he lifts up what ends up being a mask, and underneath that,
doesn't the guy comes up to him and it's Smiley's looking at himself, and doesn't he just hit him in the face?
Oh yeah, that's right. He hits him in the face.
He like uses the gun to hit him in the face, and the guy knocks down. And obviously Smiley knows it's not him.
Yeah.
So he sees the mask and he kind of pulls it up, and who's there? Liam Neeson.
Yes.
So Smiley shoots him.
Yes. As he sits up and starts screaming, and you can see between his lips there's like silver.
Yeah.
And so he shoots him. And then after he shoots him, that face is loose, and he lifts that up, and underneath is Guzman with duct tape over his mouth. And then all of a sudden, just from the side, walks up Smiley, looking at Smiley and smiling at Smiley. And he sees himself, and they look down at the body. He looks back up at Smiley again, and then he beats the shit out of him. Because it's Darkman with Smiley's face on. And it was a split screen. Again, technology of the era. It doesn't look that great now, but sorry, what?
I got disconnected. This is the second time it's happened to me, and I just came right back.
I wasn't even looking at the screen. I didn't know you were gone. I'm sorry.
No, it was real fast. It was real fast. Okay, so we have last. It was Smiley. Excuse me. They look at each other, and I forgot how Smiley dies.
Well, so Darkman starts beating the shit.
He
starts beating the shit out of Smiley and like knocks him down and bloodies him up and everything. And then he sets up the same situation as he was in. He opens up a bunch of gas valves and sets up seemingly the same thing with the little bird and the lighter. And Smiley's like legs are broken or whatever the hell else he did to him, so he's crawling across the floor. But anyway, while this is happening, Darkman goes back up to the roof as the helicopter's there looking around trying to find him, and he grabs onto the foot of the helicopter or whatever and tries to climb on.
Yes.
But he's got a Liam Neeson face on just for the hell of it, I guess. And as he's being kicked out of the helicopter, he grabs onto a convenient wire hook arrangement that's hanging from the helicopter, like a tow hook.
Hang on, there's one part there we got to talk about first, because when he jumps on there, he starts pulling on Durant.
Yes.
And Durant says, "Get him off me." And then they back up, and right next to Liam Neeson is a dude sitting there with a gun.
Yes.
who Liam throws out of the helicopter, of course.
Yes.
But how did this guy miss him? How did this guy?
I don't know. Just because, superhero.
Comic book villain. That's why. And I love comic book henchmen because they're fucking awesome.
Well, see, when Durant kicks him in the face a couple of times and the mask comes off and he's just got his gauze and everything underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
But then he falls and he grabs onto the hook. And
now,
this
is why I cannot forgive half of the bad stuff in this movie, because they do some practical effects here that are fucking amazing. They fly a man through a city on a helicopter hanging from a wire.
Oh, you said you cannot forgive, and I was like, you cannot forgive?
I can't forgive the earlier stuff because of this.
Stuff. Okay, yeah. Well, I don't know. I who knows what they were thinking when they were doing the production? I can't say. But
because this part is fucking amazing. It's awesome.
Yeah, this reminds me, as I was watching that, I was reminded of the discussion we had about Die Hard when they had like actual helicopters flying through the city, right?
Yes.
Because the fact that we know there is no CGI at this era of filmmaking, that there's no this wasn't some miniature effect or something. This was an actual helicopter dragging an actual man from a hook through the air in all of these scenes. There are a couple of shots where we see up close of him, and it is obviously green screen, and that does suck. But
yes,
otherwise, it's all there and it's all happening, which is awesome.
Yeah, those ones though are very few and far between in this sequence.
Yes,
which is why I can forgive them. Because this is as somebody who's horribly afraid of heights.
Mm-hmm.
Watching this scene was pretty cool.
So as they're just towing Darkman away, Smiley is crawling towards what he thinks is the bird and the lighter, but it turns out that was just a holographic feint, basically, that Darkman had set up with his machine, and that the real bird and lighter were on the other side of the room or whatever. And so Darkman's lab goes kablooey. Presumably with all of his equipment and all of his other stuff too. I like to think that in the time that this has all been taking place, he's got some backup where he hid the cash somewhere. That's the only way that makes sense. But that's neither here nor there. So the lab explodes, and the helicopter starts dragging Darkman through the city, past like high rises, as a police chopper starts chasing them, because it's not supposed to be in that airspace or whatever. And Durant is taking pot shots at Darkman from the helicopter with his grenade gun. It's so, just saying that, it's just like, it's so comic book.
Part of the reason the police were chasing him is you have a helicopter flying through the city with a man hanging from it.
There's that too. Yeah, there's that too. So Durant takes his grenade gun and blows up the police helicopter. It's like, okay, sure, why not? But as they drag Darkman, there's this really weird sequence where they drag him straight towards an office building. He crashes through the window of a meeting, like there's a conference going on or meeting or something. And in the moment before the slack on the wire pulls him back out of the window, he's just hanging there for a second. He says, "Oh, excuse me," and he goes out.
I love that part.
It's great. I just love it. So then they start dragging him through a freeway. And for those of you who are Sam Raimi fanatics, you will notice very briefly that the famous Sam Raimi car, which has appeared in almost every single one of Sam Raimi's movies, the yellow, I forget what it's called. It's the car that Bruce Campbell drove up to the cabin in the woods in Army of Darkness. It used in Army of Darkness, but drove up in Evil Dead. It was Uncle Ben's car in Spider-Man, so on and so on. That famous car is one of the cars that he dodges as he's swinging through the freeway. But after several near hits with hitting cars, he lands on top of a tractor trailer. And he's able to take the hook at the end of the wire and latch it on to the truck just as it's about to go through a tunnel. And so it drags the helicopter straight into the lip of the tunnel and explodes. And then you see the scene of like Darkman on top of the truck as it goes through the tunnel. It's dragging the burning wreckage of the helicopter behind it.
and he says, "See you in hell," or "Burn in hell." That's what, "Burn in hell, Durant," or whatever, which I love.
Now, there's a great part there as he's being taken down to the freeway and he starts dodging all these cars and stuff. There's an excellent little scene here where they show him run across the top of a truck.
Oh yeah, that's right.
If you watch it, it looks so goddamn silly. It really does.
Yeah,
but again, it works. It works with this.
Yeah, it's that sped up thing that Sam Raimi has used in many ways in all of his movies. So there's a lot of camera tricks and effects in this movie that, if you've seen Army of Darkness, if you've seen Evil Dead, you'll feel at home watching some of these effects, and that's why it's more forgivable for me, because I was more familiar with his style, so it made sense knowing who made the movie. Anybody else, if you're just coming into it, it's going to look really goofy, but again, you take what you get. So after this, we cut to night. It's nighttime, and we're off at the construction site, and it's the construction site that we've seen out of sight of Strack's window the couple of times that we've been in his office. And Strack is there with Julie, and he's got her there at gunpoint. And the camera pans up, and it's Durant, and his face is all fucked up, and he's got like bruises and cuts and everything. And they're waiting for Darkman to show up to save Julie. And as Strack, of course, and again, this is comic book campy supervillain stuff. So they're taking an elevator all the way to the top of this this under construction skyscraper with the girl at gunpoint. And as they go up the elevator, they get to the top, and like Strack starts talking about they've got Julie handcuffed or whatever. And he starts talking about how his father used to bring him up these buildings, and they're walking on exposed I-beams, on an unfinished skyscraper like 600 feet up in the air or whatever. Mm-hmm. And Strack starts talking about how his father used to bring him these things, used to work these deals, and he learned how to like balance and all these I-beams. So he's like basically prancing around on these I-beams. He starts talking to Durant and saying like something to the effect about what your kids would think of you and everything.
He said something like your kids would be proud of you, and Durant answers, "They are."
Oh yeah, or I do try. They do look up to me, or something like that.
Yes, that's what it is.
Yeah, okay. and he's like, "Oh well, Robert, you don't have any kids," and so he grabs Durant's face and takes off the mask, and it's Darkman, completely exposed, no bandages, no nothing. And he's like, "Oh, you really are one ugly son of a bitch."
Yes.
And so he starts taunting Darkman as he's jumping around and dancing around these things, the I-beams on the building. And he starts saying like, "I could use a man like you with your talents and everything else. I have need for this with Robert out of the way." But of course, Darkman's not having any of this. And so they start fighting, but then Strack grabs a bolt gun.
Yes.
I don't imagine this thing actually exists, or if it does, it doesn't work like this. But basically, he's got a rivet gun that shoots rivets like a gun.
Yeah, this is like a semi-automatic bolt gun, y'all.
Yeah, a semi-automatic rivet gun. He starts shooting rivets at Darkman. He starts dodging them, and there's these great little moments where we sort of see like rivet cam as each projectile goes towards Darkman. It's a very Sam Raimi thing to do.
Well, this was something that was well done. We get to see a Darkman power we didn't know he had.
Right.
Because with the bullets coming, or the bolts coming at him, you see him dodge. When it goes into that cam, that's the only reason we see it, is because it shows how he's able to dodge it.
Yeah, he's like getting out of the way. And it's a little over the top, but then what isn't at this point. But then on like the third or fourth shot, one of the bolts hits Darkman's hand dead center and nails him to an I-beam. And, I like the fact that he doesn't scream or anything. He can't feel it. It just happens. But now he's like bolted there. And I don't know if this is too much of a reach, but I almost thought a little bit of Christ-like kind of thing. Like he's like impaled through the hand kind of deal.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit, but anyway. So then Strack is like threatening him and everything else. And then Darkman makes a fist around the bolt and pulls his hand off and punches Strack in the face. Now, just before this, Julie had lost her balance and she'd fallen, and she's basically hanging very precariously on some rebar that's sticking out over the edge of the building. So she's like slowly slipping off this thing.
Didn't the other guy throw her off?
Yeah, and then he got, and then Darkman was able. Oh yeah, that's right. His foot was near a wire, and he was able to. No, wait, that happens later. Okay, so wait a sec. So he throws her off. The other henchman throws him off, or Julie off the building. Darkman, as he's trying to get from one side to the other, he grabs onto some cable to try like swing.
Mm-hmm.
And he's able to grab the cable that's also near the guy's foot, and he yanks it, and he pulls the guy off balance, and he falls to his death.
Yes.
And then he's still fighting with Strack. And then he's able to use that same cable and then swing in superhero fashion. Old pirate ship swashbuckle. He swings and grabs Julie and saves her and sets her aside in safety as he goes after Strack. And finally, he gets the best of Strack by knocking him just about off the building, but it grabs his leg at the last second and is holding him over the abyss. And Strack starts taunting him. He says, "You can't do it, can you? You kill me, you're no different than I am. You wouldn't be able to live with yourself." And then he lets go. Ah! And he says one of the best "after I killed you" lines, I think, in movies that I love. "I'm learning to live with a lot of things." It's just, I love it. Love it. But yeah, the swinging rescue thing, it is a CG thing, and not a CG thing, a green screen thing, and it looks cheesy a little bit, but the fact that it's taking place in the dark kind of helps a little in it. But it's so perfect. It's so perfect.
I didn't really have a problem with it on this one. It didn't look that bad.
Yeah. And so then we have this very somber, slow elevator ride down to the bottom of the building as Peyton is turned facing the corner in the dark away from Julie. And she's still recovering from this, but she says, "I want to help you. I care about you. I love you." And he looks at her and she like lurches back a little bit because he's still like horribly grotesque looking. And he says, I'm not the person I was. I'm a monster now. And, you can't be with her. He just figures like, I can't be a normal person now after all this.
He says, "I used to think that too."
Yes.
But I'm becoming what I look like on the outside, on the inside.
Yeah.
It's like, oh.
Yeah, it's great.
I really like that because they didn't go with that fucking Hollywood ending on this thing.
No, they didn't. It was definitely, this is a graphic novel on film. This is such a comic book and such a it is a melodrama. It is an opera of a way, because it is like the Phantom of the Opera. You have a tragic ending. You have a tragic hero that goes on. I mean, they imagine they might make a franchise out of this, so he couldn't have the happy ending. I like they didn't have the happy ending. And then, so as he runs out of the elevator, she tries to chase after him, but he runs, just as he's running away, we see him pull on a mask that he's hidden underneath his coat. And she tries to chase him out into the street, but at this point, she has no idea what he looks like. And so she grabs a couple of people thinking it's him because they're wearing dark clothes, but it's not. And then the final shot, a face looks up from the crowd, and it's Bruce Campbell. And we get the parting line. It's like, "I'm everyone and no one. Everywhere, nowhere. Call me Darkman." It's just, I love it.
Yeah, it was really well done, and I am so glad they didn't pull a fucking Hollywood ending on that. That would have pissed me off at this point.
Yeah.
Like I said, I can forgive most of the stuff about this movie because it's a comic book, guys. You're watching a comic book on screen.
But that's it. That's right where it ends, and it sets itself up for a franchise which, unfortunately, at least movie-wise, failed miserably. The sequels are awful. Awful. The second movie, The Return of Durant, somehow Durant survived the helicopter. Yeah, that alone made me go, no. I watched it. I did watch the sequel. I didn't know any better. It was the first time I'd ever heard Arnold Vosloo talk before. And he talks in like this posh accent. He doesn't sound anything like a burn victim. There's no horror to it. He's more like a gentleman like citizen guy. It's really bad. It's really bad. There were a couple funny parts that I remember, but it wasn't Darkman. It was stupid. The best Darkman sequels, they did a limited, so they did two things. One, Marvel Comics got the license to make a Darkman comic book, and there was a limited series Darkman comic book. I think it went like for 4 or 5 issues. So it was just kind of like a test the waters kind of thing. I have the first issue. I think I might have the second. That comic book is dark, and I don't mean that as a joke. I mean, like, there's the bad guy is like this Marquis de Sade guy that tortures people with like irons and stuff. He thinks he's a witch finder. And he sees Darkman as like a demon that needs to be vanquished. It's really, and it's all set in the city and everything. It's really, really gritty. So technically, Darkman is part of the Marvel universe. Technically. But the better sequels, they did a very brief run of novels. Almost quite literally pulp fiction that continue the story of Darkman after the movie. And they're great. I've got all of them. And I think they're out of print. You can't find them anywhere. But they are great little, sort of noir-ish stories about Darkman. And they don't let up the whole tragedy and violence of the thing. They're very grim little adventures. They've got humor in them. Very much like the movie. I really like them. So if you can find copies of the Darkman novels and like Darkman, don't watch the movies, read the novels. Definitely better than the movies. But I love this character. I love the concept. It's got like Mission Impossible kind of stuff with the masks. It's got the horror aspect of sort of this Frankenstein monster kind of person, Phantom of the Opera thing going on. You've got a crime fighter who is definitely a flawed character and has no, like, his entire life's destroyed. So he replaces trying to, pursue science by trying to pursue justice, that kind of thing. I love it. I absolutely love it. I wish this character had a bigger showcase than it did back then, but it just kind of went by the wayside, unfortunately.
Well, and again, even as campy as Burton's Batman still was, it kind of changed comic book movies and I don't want to say cinema, but movies, television, anything to do with comic books and the way they were done. Just because it was a more there's nothing in there, even like the Batwing flying around. Obviously, this is miniatures and stuff, but it looked really good.
Yes.
And I think Darkman would have been better off if it had come out 5 years earlier.
Yeah, probably.
Because the aesthetic and everything is a little outdated for when it came out. Again, if you like campy shit, it's awesome. It's fucking great. You can't get around some of the effects. Some of them that were just bad. I remember one of the times, I think it is, where he's going into, for lack of a better term, Hulk mode.
Yes.
You see these yellow streaks across the screen.
Yes.
And it would fit great in a comic book panel. But they hadn't done anything like that anywhere else in the movie. So it's not like the one Hulk movie where they tried to make it all these panels.
Right.
So it was so horribly out of place with everything else.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's just a few of those that happen. This is a good movie, guys. If this was the first time I'd seen it, definitely you should watch it.
The other thing to remember too, speaking of Batman, is that this movie was made on a relatively modest, at least, but still pretty big for back in the 90s, $16 million budget. It made just under $50 million, so it was decidedly profitable. But Batman had a $35 million budget. So with over almost double the budget, Batman could do a lot more things a lot more smoothly than, of course, a $60 million movie can.
Sure.
Of course, and Sam Raimi has this particular style that he uses with some of his effects and things. And so, and who knows what kind of difficulties they had in the production. But either way, if you can go into this first understanding that it is a comic book, that it is a sort of a soap opera and a melodrama, and also forgiving certain things for the time that it was, Yeah, no, this is a character that I wish more was done with. I'm glad that he is what he is, so to speak, that they didn't like ruin it any further than they did. Because you can forget those other two movies
It
and
just
nothing's.
did it to me again.
What? Oh shit! I didn't even see it.
I was gone for like 5 seconds.
Okay, I didn't see. I'm looking at the chat screen, and I don't have two monitors like some fancy people I know, so I can't tell. But let's see. I'll check the chat real quick. Q says my internet just cut out for a few minutes. Does Marvel own Dark Horse Comics?
No,
not that I know of. No. Yeah, Marvel did a quick run on that. They also did a crossover thing where it was Darkman versus Army of Darkness, or no, Darkman versus Ash or something from Army of Darkness. They kind of crossed over Sam Raimi properties for a little bit at one point. But yeah, there was a 6-issue run on Marvel Comics of Darkman. I own the first 2 issues. I wish I had all of them. I might have to try to find them at some point, but anyway, yeah, guys, just in the spirit of it being sort of Avengers weekend after a fashion, and probably Avengers month, knowing how good that movie was, I just thought I'd do a little favorite underscored and lesser known superhero, completely original character, wasn't based off of or wasn't an intellectual property that was owned by anyone ahead of time. Sam Raimi just kind of came up with it, and I love the concept. I love the character. I love that movie. And it's kind of part of my growing up. So any other thoughts before we shuffle on, Monkey?
This needs to continue on the big screen with a big budget.
Would be nice.
Not a huge budget. I don't want to see a reboot.
No.
I want to see a continuation. They can, like I said, I haven't seen the 2 sequels, so they can pretend those never even happened, in my opinion. But just continue this character because he's a very good character, and we finally reached a place, because this might have hurt him too. We finally reached a place where being the anti-hero can be okay.
Yeah,
Deadpool showed us that. I mean,
yeah,
happily killing people and having fun with it. The end of this movie and the end of Batman are complete opposites.
Yes,
Batman, the guy, the villain dies, but not because Batman's killed him. He tried to save him. And in this one, he's like, fuck it, I'll let him drop.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that could have been a product of it too. I just think a little bit better effects, of course, because we're in modern times, but keep it as campy as it is. And I think this could be a great reboot / rebirth. That's what I want, not a reboot.
I think that Darkman would be served well by a Stars or Netflix type series.
I could see that too.
I mean they're just about to wrap up Ash versus Evil Dead, which was a continuation of the Army of Darkness and Evil Dead movies. It would require, unfortunately, a retelling of the origin. I don't think people today would. I don't think Darkman is nearly as much of a cult staple as Army of Darkness and Evil Dead are. So I don't think you could sort of merge into a new series with different actors and not have to retell the origin somewhat. But yeah, the adventures of Darkman going on capers and stuff and impersonating people and doing all this thing would really, I think, work better rather than another movie series, but a gritty little short. Don't overdo it, TV, if you decide to do this short series of episodes. I can only hope. I would be surprised if it ever happens. Who knows who owns the rights to Darkman at this stage of the game? So
sure.
Anyway, yeah, guys,
I really enjoyed it.
Yep, I love it. Go see it if you haven't already. You can get all 3 movies, fortunately or unfortunately, for a relatively cheap price on Amazon. I think you can see it on YouTube for like $3 by itself if you're willing to pay on YouTube to watch a movie. So yeah, it's out there. It's not difficult to find. So guys, thank you so much for joining us. I believe the tentative plan is, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, Monkey, but next time I think we're going to do the night
Why am I suddenly forgetting?
Oh,
the
A
name?
Knight's Tale.
A Knight's
That's what we
Tale. Knight's
talked
Tale.
about. Yeah.
Heath Ledger. Yeah, I was able to pick up a copy of A Knight's Tale because I know Monkey loves that movie.
I fucking love that movie.
And I only saw it once in the theater when it came out, so it'd be relatively fresh for me to watch it. So next time we do this, presumably next weekend, but I guess we'll see because things could change. On Monkey's channel, we'll be doing A Knight's Tale. After that, I don't think we have anything planned, but we'll see what happens. Other than that, guys, thank you so much for coming out and joining us to listen to us rant. Well, not rant so much as to talk about this movie. Always appreciate you guys are a great audience here, both here and on Lords of the Night, 6 nights a week on Monkey, mine, and Satsu's channels. Otherwise, we will talk to you guys later. Hope you have a good weekend.
See you guys.